Okay, we're going to continue with our examples in these set of notes. First one is to write a recursive and explicit rule for the sequence, which we just did at the end of the previous video. Again, I'm going to do two diversions for the recursive. Again, the only difference there is that the first one talks about the previous term, the second version talks about the next term using the n+1. You generate the stuff the same way. Explicit, again, I'm using parentheses. Always to the n-1 for that. Right, now we're going to use these rules. We're going to find our two formulas and then maybe find a term in the sequence. So we're going to find A20 given A1 is 3 and R is 2. For recursive, I'll just write the one version this time. The explicit is AN 3 times 2 to the n-1. Now in this situation you don't have to use the parentheses, but I like to use it pretty consistently. And then if we're finding A20, we just plug in 20. And this should give you a fairly big number. So 1,572,864. Again, you'll notice, unless we're dividing, that you're going to get some pretty big numbers for term values. We're going to do the same thing for our next one. First term is 2187. Here we actually have to calculate the common ratio. So if you're dividing something that's going a smaller number to a bigger number, I would always use the fraction tool for this, because most likely your ratio will be a fraction. In this case, it comes out to 1/3. We'll write a recursive and an explicit. And then once we have both formulas, we'll use the explicit to figure out the 10th term. In this case, when you calculate it, again, using the fraction tool is helpful. We'll get A10 is 1/9. Okay, so just like with arithmetic, those are the easier ones. You're given pretty much all the information you need to plug in. Now we're going to get into some harder ones where we have to find missing values. So we're given A6 and we're given A1, and we want to find the R value. The other thing you can determine from this is that your N is 6. So we'll plug everything into the formula. Things you want to do for solving for this: first, divide both sides by 625. I'll subtract the exponents. Now when you divide, you want to keep it in fraction form. Although I guess if you didn't keep it in fraction, you could still get a correct answer. And we want to take the fifth root. Remember, taking the fifth root, another option is raising it to the 1/5 exponent. And that's probably easier to do in the calculator. So put in your calculator 1/3125, raise it to the 1/5. You'll get an R value of 1/5 or 0.2. And that'll just depend if you're using the fraction tool or not. Once we have that information, you're just doing a recursive and explicit. And that's it for that one. Our last one's a little trickier, but I'm going to show you some ways to kind of figure out how to do this without using systems of equations. It would be kind of tough with exponentials. So I'm writing it out as like a blank space question. This might be another type of question you would see. And then we're going to pretend like we're going from the first term You might be thinking, why am I doing that? Well, if I do that, I can solve it the way I did the previous question. So now I'm going to say A1 is 96. And this is for solving purposes. This isn't our actual A1. So our A5 we're treating as 24576. And it's telling us our n is 5. So we're going to use that with a formula to figure out what our r value is. And then we'll have enough information to go backwards to find A1 and to get our equations. So same as before, first divide both sides by 96 to get r by itself. It'll be r to the 4th equals 256. Then you can 4th root or raise to the 1/4. And we have our r value. Now in order to figure out our actual A1, we can now go backwards from our original thing and divide. Whoops, I did one too many line there. So normally I'd be multiplying to go forwards. You can divide if you go backwards. So if I do 96 divided by 4, I get 24. 24 divided by 4, I get 6. So now I have my first term and my r value. And this is probably the most complicated of the types of questions you will get. And that gives us enough information to write our two formulas. All right, so now You will either take a look at in class, working on the practice problems that go along with this, or do this at home if you're watching these videos on your own and doing those for homework.